Hello beautiful people, this is Joseph from Humble You Media, and in this video I want to get into a topic that many are longing for in today's times, and that's conscious purification. You see, there's a lot of illusion, a lot of lies being set out into the world, and that distorts everyone's conscious perception of reality. And behind that conscious perception of reality lies the truth, lies what is, but over top of it is our own ideas, our own beliefs, our own complexes and programs that distort the picture. So purification is removing all that perception to allow consciousness to be. Jung went through this in the Black Books and in his Red Book. And he initially started his first entry with this idea of returning, tempered and purified. As he told his soul, I found the right way. It led me to you, to my soul. I returned, tempered and purified. And then to conclude, Liber Secundus, so many entries after this. He then states, an opus is needed that one can squander decades on and do it out of necessity. I must catch up with a piece of the Middle Ages within myself. We have only finished the Middle Ages of others. I must begin early in that period when the hermits died out. Asceticism, inquisition, torture are close at hand and impose themselves. The barbarian requires barbaric means of education. My eye, you are a barbarian. I want to live with you. Therefore I will carry you through an utterly medieval hell until you are capable of making living with you bearable. You should be the vessel and womb of life. Therefore I shall purify you. The touchstone is being alone with oneself. This is the way. And so you see the way through the Red Book, the way through individuation, the way through conscious healing and self-revelation is purification. And through these quotes you notice it's not a one and done quick deal. It takes a while as he was still purifying his self, or rather the unconscious aspects of his self, at the end of Liber Secundus. And it took that initial waking up to realize he was living somewhere else, away from himself, that got the whole process started. And lastly, purification, as you've noticed, with his dragging himself through hell, it's not an only good aspect. It's not what you think is holy, because what Jung says is holy is both good and evil. Now, to truly grasp what is going on, we got to get into the psyche. I don't want to spend hours on breaking down the conscious, the unconscious, and all of its parts, but bringing up the whole and looking at some parts will help us really explain purification. I want to mention it is only a model. It is not fact, but it is pointing you towards the invisible. So with that, we begin with a circle. This will represent the whole psyche. And then we're going to split this circle into 3 sections that all fade into each other. The conscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. The top realm of consciousness is everything that is experienced. This realm is labeled by Jung as the ego, our personal subjective scope of consciousness. This is your I, again, what you are experiencing. Here the idea of will is exercised and personas are formed as we shape how we wish the world to see us, both from our beliefs as well as others. The next realm is the personal unconscious, or sometimes known as the subconscious. This is where our complexes and patterns of behaviors lie. Our personal shadows and traumatic and fulfilling memories are found. Under this, our deepest traumas and memories that have not been realized start blending into what is known as the abyss. This is the deepest and largest layer, as it increases scope exponentially with depth into infinity. And this realm is known as, in Jungian terms, the collective unconscious, a realm shared within all. Here lie ancestral memories and traumas, archetypal forces, and deep intuitional patterns of behavior. The entire psyche, as we have just outlined, as one, would be represented as the self. And with that, I should mention, just because the personal and collective unconscious are titled unconscious, does not mean they're unconscious, but rather unconscious to consciousness, or to the ego. For example, you smell a scent, or you hear a piece of music, or you see an image, and suddenly you're brought back to an older memory, an older time. The thoughts, the emotions, your entire being shifts, in a sense, out of time, into that moment. That ability to receive that information out of your will, because of what was experienced, shows there's a lot more going on within you. And it's through this rather transcendental effect, which Jung titles the transcendent function, where we're able to gather information that we're not consciously aware of. Another transcendental function of the mind is the libido, and this is our desire. This is what shapes and moves consciousness. So if your whole life is living on money, your libido is going to be trapped in anything that may give you money, may make you lose money. As you see, it gets distorted. And lastly, on the psyche, I want to add this important idea of perception. It is in consciousness, in the ego, where perceptions are formed, where they're shaped, with their ties inwardly in the personal and even collective unconscious. In Latin, perception means to gather. So it's a gathering of what we've seen outwardly or inwardly through the unconscious, and then we perceive it into consciousness. So you see how there's more information that is pure before consciousness sees it. And it's that information that we're trying to get to. So to start on purification, I'm going to bring up two words that I really connected with when watching a lecture by Pierre Grimes, a lecture called The Religion of No Religion. You can find it on YouTube. And in it, he discusses these two words of fate and providence. Now, fate is to be bound to a certain outcome. You hear, oh, he or she was fated to react in that manner. And then providence can be broken up into pro, which is prior, and videns, or videre in Latin, which means to see. So together it represents prior to seeing, prior to perception. So the story goes, we're born into this world, then our consciousness starts to get shaped and formed. Its perceptions, its unconscious patterns, its complexes are all there as we continue to live. And in this living and willing, through all that information, we continue building more complexes on top of complexes, on top of patterns, which then in turn fade our reality. You see, this is fate. Our complexes are our fate. We're fated by them. We're trapped in them. And that's the land of Maya. That's the land of illusion. That's the land that the majority of souls are trapped in. The majority of the libido is trapped in. It's outwardly extended and attached to its objects. And you see, all this Maya continues to feed into the unconscious. Distorted perceptions, unconscious complexes and shadows. And they're all waiting their day of that fated revelation. Without awakening to the psychic reality within oneself, an individual will continue to live a life of self-created illusion, with the help of the world around them, without ever truly experiencing reality. One lives a fated existence and fades away unfulfilled into meaninglessness. And you see, with this, the ego is trapped. And in this trappings, there's really nowhere for the ego to go. You see, if it gives up, then there's no consciousness. And that doesn't mean the unconscious isn't still active, which will then possess consciousness and probably lead to a psychosis. Now, if one believes in the illusion and gives their life to the illusion as it is real, well, then they're just affirming that illusion, which is more trappings. If one tries to think their way out of it, I'm going to think my way through this, well, then they're thinking through that perception, which will in turn build more complexes, more webs of illusion. There's nowhere to go for the ego. And there's nowhere to receive that prior knowledge, that knowledge prior to seeing, that foresight, unless it stops trying and realizes it needs another to help it forward. In Jungian terms, that other being the unconscious. And this is what Jung did. He woke up to the fact that there was more in him. When he realized that his visions of World War I, before they occurred, were real. They were intelligent. And this humbled his eye, his ego, to return to his soul. And if you remember that first quote I read, he knew nothing of his self. It wasn't until the second quote where he starts speaking in that manner, of the other that needs purification. He originally went in just to purify his I, his ego. But he realized this process goes a little bit deeper than one's own personal unconscious. And what's really important to remember in this is that the ego, the I, what we experience, has to go through it. It has to go through the perceptual death. It has to go through the emptying of what it believed it was. And it has to experience all the horrors and beauties included. The ego, in removing its programming, removing all of its comforts, it's not going to feel good. There's going to be some suffering along the way. But it's the only process through. It's the only process to remove that distortion, that perception, and allow the self to come through. Now, nowadays, many are longing, as I said, for this purification. But the thing is, I see many seeing it in the wrong light, so to say. I see many hoping for positive vibes only, or hoping for some spiritual group, or some religion, or some ism to save them, to free them, to purify them. But unfortunately, this is nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And it'll lead you into more Maya that will then need to be purified if you ever want to truly see. Now, purification obviously isn't perfection, but rather purification is wholeness. That conscious realm has to be whole, has to have no judgment, no perception, to be able to accept what comes through, what is, from the unconscious, from the external world. Purification is not a pick and choose. It's rather a bearing, a suspension, an allowing of a reflection so the self could see itself. And with this, you're starting to notice how shadow work is purification. Why? Because you're looking toward that space that you've repressed, that you've denied. And you're allowing it to come through. That's purification. That's healing. But it's difficult work. You see, not many egos out there are willing to do this. And you see why many are longing for it, but are never fulfilled. Now, at this point, many are saying, okay, Joseph, I'm ready for it. What are the steps? How do I do it? What's the process? And to this I answer, there is no process. There are no steps. Because each of us has our own perception of reality. We each have our own bounds into our programs, into our conditioning, based off of so many factors. It makes it completely impossible to have a universal medicine. So to you, this is your great work. This is for you to find, for you to see what works and what doesn't, for you to go through and experience. But I'm not going to leave you empty-handed, as I do have a few points about purification, as well as a few quotes in the Red Book on this topic. Now, in purification, there's one thing that'll show up throughout, and that's temptations. That which will draw the ego back into its comforts, into its attachments, back into its addictions, into the land of Maya, the illusion. And you would think purification should remove all temptation, and you'll be free. But Jung had another point, as he writes in Nox Secunda. So long as we live here on earth, we cannot escape temptation. There is no man who is so perfect, and no saint so sacred, that he cannot be tempted on occasion. Yes, we could hardly be without temptation. After this, a footnote follows in regards to Thomas à Kempis's imitation of Christ. The footnote says, he goes on to emphasize the benefits of temptations as being the means through which man is humbled, purified, and disciplined. So according to Jung, these temptations are bound to happen. And if one remains pure in their intention, to remain detached and clear of any contamination, then these temptations will have a growth potential if one's not tempted. And if you're struggling seeing purification as wholeness rather than perfection, if you get this idea in your head that purification is only holy, only goodness, only taking a bath in a beautiful shower and washing yourself clean, well then, I think this quote from Jung in the Red Book gives you a nice taste of the true essence of conscious purification. As he wrote, I've trodden the winepress alone, and no one is with me. I have trodden myself down in my anger, and trampled upon myself in my fury. Hence my blood has spattered my clothes, and I have stained my robe. For I have afforded myself a day of vengeance, and the year to redeem myself has come. And I look around, and there was no one to help, and I wondered that there was no one who stood by me. Therefore my own arm must save me, and my fury upheld me. And I trod myself down in my rage, and made myself drunk in my fury, and spit my blood on the earth. For I took my misdeed upon myself, so that the God would be healed. You see many themes that are running throughout this quote, such as that darkness that's in purification, as well as that idea of doing it alone, that no one's going to come and save you. And if anyone did, saved you from what you're experiencing, well, that means you can't experience it. Now, just a few sentences later, Jung adds another quote for those seeking that beautiful, flawless perfection. But he who goes into one and not also at the same time into the other, by accepting what comes towards him, will simply teach and live the one and turn it into a reality. For he will be its victim. That reality, again, is that earlier mentioned Maya. And that victim, that being a victim that he speaks about, is being fated. He continues on this fate. When you go into the one and hence consider the other approaching you as your enemy, you will fight against the other. But you will do so because you fail to recognize the other is also in you. On the contrary, you think that the other comes somehow from without, and you think that you can also catch sight of it in the views and actions of your fellow men, which clash with yours. You thus fight the other and are completely blinded. And in that you see how people are fated to react to another, to fight what lies outside them, and to never truly see where it lies, where the healing's needed. In addition, you'll note that he is saying we are completely blinded in this. And this is that distorted perception. Again, which the only healing is a clearing, a purification. And to conclude this quote, Jung wrote, "But he who accepts what approaches him because it is also in him, quarrels and wrangles no more, but looks into himself and keeps silent. He sees the tree of life, whose roots reach down into hell, and whose top touches heaven." And the last note I want to end on is this idea of doubt. You see, when you start on your way, you start doing some shadow work, you start reflecting on dreams, you start seeing the unconscious and opening that inner dialectic, there'll be moments where nothing seems to be happening. If anything, everything seems worse than it was. And a lot of doubt starts to enter. And it's this doubt that Jung spoke a lot about in the Red Book, and to conclude this specific chapter, where he writes, "But you grow if you stand still in the greatest doubt, and therefore steadfastness in great doubt is a veritable flower of life. He who cannot bear doubt does not bear himself. Such a one is doubtful. He does not grow and hence does not live. The strong have doubt, but doubt has the weak. My speech is neither light nor dark, since it is the speech of someone who is growing." And with that, you see this process of purification is growth, as consciousness is expanding its scope of what it can see, what it can handle, what it can grasp in its perception. And what I want to end with is this. As I was putting this whole idea together of purification, of Jung, of breaking our fate, and going towards providence, and really expanding consciousness in the most pure way, I was led, as always, by the logos, we'll say, to read a little bit more into Thomas à Kempis, again as that quote came up when discussing purification and perfection. And it was in this quote, and in this section, where I found more. I found a whole section, which is rather lengthy, but it described everything we just discussed. So I figure I'd read it to you and leave that as our final words to meditate on, to reflect on. In The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, there's a section called The Discipline of the Inner Life. In it he wrote, "The man who can experience all the values of life, not judging them by what's said about them, or the price that's put upon them, but as they really are, he is the true expert. His learning is not human, but divine. And a man like that, who knows how to walk by the light within him, and makes little account of outward things, does not have to look for a suitable place, or wait for a suitable time before he falls to his devotions. Living in this inner world, he never squanders his attention on the things of sense, and recollection comes easy to him. Is there a practical work to be done? Some business that can't be put off? He doesn't feel it is an obstacle. He is adaptable enough to take things as they come. If there's order and discipline in your own soul, the doings of other people won't surprise you or put you out. If you are fond to interfering, to that extent you will always be faced with difficulties and distractions. If you were all right in yourself, if you'd really been through the process of purification, you'd be able to turn anything to good account and profit by it. Why is it that such a lot of things get on your nerves and are always disturbing your peace of mind? Because you never really died to self, never really weaned yourself away from earthly things. The unchastened love of creatures, that's what disfigures and entangles a man's conscience as nothing else does. If you refuse all outward consolation, heaven will come into your view and fill you again and again with spiritual rejoicing. So with that, I hope you see that this faded existence, this distorted perception of reality, can be healed, can turn into providence, which helps lead you on your own path towards self, towards the light and truth. But it takes a purification to get there, and a difficult one at that. It takes an ego to be humble enough to bear itself, to burn through all of what it thought it was, and be filled with that providence. As Thomas à Kempis says, that will come into your view again and again with spiritual rejoicing. So thank you so much for watching, and look out for new videos coming up shortly on Jung, the mind and consciousness. Until then, stay humble.